this target audience and value proposition thing. I'm skeptical of this for a podcast like ours. Even if you narrow down some target audience, like how does that help you?
It helps you in a way.
We're not running LinkedIn ads over here. Like
It's helpful when you're creating any kind of content, or when you're trying to serve anyone, to know who are the people you're serving. Like, if, for example, this podcast were aimed at, I don't know, 13-year-old kids living in the UK, it would be a different sort of podcast. If it's like, if it's a podcast aimed at 45-year-olds living in the US, it's a different kind of podcast. And so we actually do have a target audience in mind. Usually for us,
do
as
we?
people, yeah, it's just like implicit rather than explicitly stated. And it's usually kind of people like you and me who are interested in the same kind of stuff that you and me are interested in. And
I mean, I wouldn't say that I'm trying to target those people. It's like, look, I think for some podcasts that are about more concrete, narrow topics or whatever, yes, it's fine. Like the My First Million podcast, they probably intentionally target it at people, aged 20 to, you know, 20 to 40 who are kind of into tech or whatever, right?
yeah.
But if you think about, I don't know, something like Conan's podcast, I mean, maybe they're deliberately targeting it at some people behind the scenes, but I imagine Conan's podcast is just like, hey, we're gonna we're gonna like do this podcast. We're gonna have these actors and stuff on, and we're gonna have a chat. And I imagine they have a pretty good idea of who watches it. Like they probably know, okay, there's not many 80-year-olds watching, watching Conan on TV or listening to the podcast. But I don't think like, I think for a general podcast like something like Conan's or like ours,
Yeah.
I don't see how this target audience thing is relevant. Like I can see it for your YouTube. Like if you're making study videos, yes, fine. Obviously there's a target audience in mind. If you're making productivity videos, again, yeah. But for this, I really don't see it.
Like, so my point is that if we were taking the podcast quote more seriously, we would sit down and actually think about this, that, okay, who is our, who is the sort of person who will scream about the podcast from the rooftops? Like, if we had to boil it down to a single avatar,
Yeah.
then what would that person look like? Like, for example, with my YouTube channel, yeah, there's a lot of people who watch it, but like, if I had to boil it down to a single avatar who would scream it from the rooftops, I call that avatar Medic Mo. This is like a sort of 20-year-old medical student, probably in London, probably interested in tech, probably wants to learn to read more, probably pretty bad at managing his time, probably cares about like how to study, but not so much to the point that he cares about ranking first in his year. Probably, enjoys video gaming once in a while, probably wants to improve his social skills, probably enjoys board games rather than going to the club.
Yeah.
And these sorts of things, like it sounds like a sort of BSE kind of exercise, but actually just taking the time to think about this and deciding, okay, who is this person? What's their vibe?
Yeah.
And even though even if it might not change things immediately, like it wouldn't change the things that we talk about, just having that in mind, helps with topic generation because you can think, okay, what are the sorts of things this person would be interested in, and it also helps just targeting things at the appropriate level of like abstraction or like complicatedness, like you explaining maths concepts. If our target audience avatar was like someone who's a math student, you would assume more knowledge than you would otherwise. But we know that our target audience is not people under 13, for example. Therefore, you don't have to explain basic maths. You can assume a certain level. So in a way, we are doing it implicitly. But most people would say, and I would agree, that if you take the time to define it explicitly, it just helps you think about this in a more systematic way.
I find it hard to imagine what we might be doing differently if we came up with this persona. Just give me one tangible thing we might do differently if we came up with
I mean, we haven't come up with a persona, therefore it's hard to, like, the point is in coming up with the way we're approaching this podcast is like we'll sit down and we'll figure it out as we go along. That's fine. That's a totally reasonable way to do things. But if we were taking it more seriously, we would sit down and figure out, okay, who are the people watching this? Let's look at the stats and let's see where they're coming from. Let's see if there's anything we can glean from the audience at large. We would probably be doing things like, marketing companies do these like surveys where, what sort of topic would you like discussed on the podcast? Or when it comes to socializing with friends, what's your biggest challenge? Or what's something you often think about? What's something that keeps you up at night? Doing some level of market research around that would, I imagine, give us some ideas for topics. But we just never done that beyond our kind of Not Overthinkers Slack group. We just never really done that. And if you're taking, for example, the YouTube channel seriously, it's the sort of thing you would do.
I think it also depends on where you are on the spectrum of like pure art slash self-expression to like, you know, pure I don't know what pure pandering, you know?
But
And
even
like,
thinking about that and defining it up front, or defining it at some point is helpful.
yeah, potentially. Fine. I'm still skeptical, but whatever.